Welcome to Hell of a Picture. My name is Andrew Bartlett, and this is a weekly movie podcast where we discuss some of the most unforgettable movies in history, and we kind of decide whether they get the distinction of a hell of a picture. As I said, my name is Andrew Bartlett, and I'm sitting across the internet as I do every week from the Siskel to my Ebert, Mr. David Hollingshurst. How you doing today, bud?
Doing good. Trying to remember which one was Siskel and which one was Ebert so I can get a mental image of who I'm supposed to be and how I'm supposed to behave. Yeah, whatever. I just roll. Oh, you know what? I'll be Leonard Maltin. Forget it. I liked Maltin. He was good.
Yeah, you're a big Maltin guy.
Big Maltin guy. Huge Maltin guy. And just like Leonard Maltin, I am down to talk surrealist cinema with you today.
Nice segue. Today we're kind of, we pivoted a bit. We did our sort of reality mind-bending films the past few weeks with Total Recall, The Matrix, the Blade Runners, and we pivoted last week into Blade Runner 2049, which of course is a Denis Villeneuve film. We decided that was definitely a hell of a picture, and we're continuing with a Denis Villeneuve mind-bending film and going to talk about Enemy. This is one of his, I don't want to say lesser-known films, but, it obviously didn't have the scope of Blade Runner 2049 or, most recently the Dune films. And he made this in 2013 with Jake Gyllenhaal. And this was sort of his foray into I don't want to say Hollywood filmmaking because it is an independent film and it's it's got a small budget, small cast, and you can kind of tell that. And it was shot in Canada, but this was sort of his. He kind of comes out the same year as Prisoners, which was sort of his big. That was his big Hollywood film that got lots of buzz, and that sort of led to Sicario, and then Arrival, which he got an Oscar nomination for. So anyway, that was sort of a Enemy. If people aren't super familiar with it, that was sort of like a little bit of a background on it before David gives us the rundown, which he does each and every week. Anything you want to touch on before we get into that, Dave?
No, just that you're correct in saying it is definitely lesser known. It was unknown to me for sure. So
yes,
speaking for the general population, yeah, I would say it is not really on most people's radar. But maybe now we can draw some attention to it. With all of our clout, and we'll cast a spotlight on the lesser known Villeneuve works. And I will give us the rundown if you are ready.
I want to make one more quick note. I mentioned last week, we want to thank all the subscribers. I should have done this off the hop before we started talking about the movies, but like and subscribe, follow us on all the socials, Hell of a Picture podcast. We're just continuing to try to grow, widen our audience, share it with your friends. If you like movies and you like watching a couple, jabrones talk about some movies, share it along. Always trying to get bigger.
That's right. Two dudes talking movies. So the aforementioned rundown. So after a truly creepy and enigmatic opening scene at some kind of arachno-erotic peep show, a phrase I never thought I would say, we are introduced to Adam Bell, a university history/philosophy professor who seems to be becoming unwound. Yes, Adam is in the grips of palpable ennui. He's fidgety, he's sweaty, he's dissatisfied, and he's an inconsiderate lover, it must be said. During an awkward exchange with a coworker, Adam is recommended what sounds like a terrible movie, Where There's a Will, There's a Way. Forcing himself to watch it, Adam comes across something shocking. He is in the movie. Some quick internet sleuthing leads him to Daniel St. Clair, a small-time film actor whose real name is Anthony, and who looks exactly like Adam. Now, as it happens, Anthony lives in the greater Toronto area, so Adam begins stalking him. He goes to his work, his apartment, even calling and speaking to his wife. Eventually, Anthony agrees to meet, and the two men realize they are not long-lost twins, but exact physical copies of each other. down to the last detail. And this revelation startles Adam, and he decides he wants nothing to do with any of it. But Anthony is not done with him, and he begins stalking Adam. The film culminates in a perverse wife swap scenario and a car crash, leaving us all to wonder who was who knew what was real, and what's the deal with that fucking spider. So, yeah, Enemy debuted at TIFF in 2013, but it was released widely in 2014. It was directed, of course, by Denis Villeneuve and based on the novel The Double by Jose Saramago. It stars Jake Gyllenhaal as Adam Bell and Anthony Clare, Melanie Laurent as Mary, Sarah Gadon as Helen, that's a good Canadian girl right there, and Isabella Rossellini as Adam's mother. Weirdly enough, I could not find a budget for this film. I don't know if you were able to track one down, but I couldn't find one.
No, I tried.
Yeah, very, very odd. Weird to not be able to get those numbers. But the global box office was somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 million, which probably means it lost money. It was produced in part by Telefilm Canada and shot largely in the GTA. That's the Greater Toronto area, for those not familiar. I could even see my building, actually, in one of the cityscape shots. So that was pretty cool.
Cool.
Yeah, the film received 10 nominations at the Canadian Screen Awards, including Best Director and Best Supporting Actress for Villeneuve and Gadon, respectively. Those being wins, I should mention. It was also named the Best Canadian Film of 2014 by the Toronto Film Critics Association. So critics were generally keen on the film. Its performances, its directions were all praised. But audiences were more divided. And given the surrealist nature of the picture, I think that's unsurprising. This kind of film does often divide the movie-going public. And that is your rundown.
Well said. I definitely can see why fans would, or audiences would, think this is a difficult picture to kind of take in.
Certainly.
And critically, it definitely makes sense. I think this is a great pivot for us with the idea of this film and what it brings to the table. You know, you mentioned the budget, and this isn't sort of like uncommon, I think, in Hollywood. Maybe not so much now, but 10 years ago, 20 years ago, sort of throughout the 90s, the 2000s, young independent filmmakers would often, make a movie, and then the studios would sort of like it and be like, "Oh yeah, that's great." But we'll throw you a little bit of money, see what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would sort of give them like I guess, I don't want to say practice, but he had done like some very critically acclaimed Canadian features, Polytechnique and Unanswered, which I haven't seen either of those, but they were both critically acclaimed. Mm-hmm. And then so my assumption here is that sort of like people saw them and were like, okay, we're going to throw this Canadian guy a little bit of money. Probably the budget was probably 5 million. Maybe you can tell it's like not a huge budget just from like how it's presented or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, maybe 5 or 10 million sort of thing, a small-ish budget, and was like, see what you can do. But like, if we like this, then we're going to, throw you into Prisoners, mm-hmm. which was sort of like a bigger movie, obviously. But actually Prisoners actually came out before this. So I would assume that everything I said was incorrect.
No, I actually think you're correct. I think the order of production though went the way you were describing it. I think the releases were inverted, but I think you are correct, or at least concurrent. They were more or less concurrent. Like it was pretty close, right. and Prisoners did have a larger budget, so I think you are correct in that this was kind of a prove it project. Here's $5 or $10 million. Most of that's probably paying Gyllenhaal, and and then show us what you can do on a shoestring, then we'll give you some real cash. And I think that might have been what happened here. That does seem correct.
Yeah. And this is sort of also what they do a lot with filmmakers, is just sort of like, okay, the classic, one for you, one for us. Mm-hmm. Right. And actors do this all the time. But, we mentioned this when we talked about The Matrix, and the Wachowski siblings were, when they first did Bound, they sort of had written the script for, oh gosh, was it called Prisoners?
Assassins?
I can't remember. Assassins.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yes. So they wrote that script and was got made, and it was great. And then they sort of the production companies are like, okay, or the studios are like, okay, go make Bound, and they go make us another movie, and they make it, and they love it, and then they give them all the money for The Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
Not so similar to here. It's like Prisoners is obviously a bigger budget, has a lot of bigger stars, Hugh Jackman in it, and then Enemy is also sort of like, okay, we'll give you a little bit more money and show me what you can do, which was again critically, and you can tell by how the films are presented. Prisoners is a Hollywood movie. You can kind of tell, right? Just with the content, it's missing. A little girl goes missing, sort of thing, and they're trying to find her, and it's like it is a very Hollywood movie and story versus this movie Enemy,
Mm-hmm.
which is what you said in your rundown is a sort of a very surrealist, weird, bizarre. What did I just watch movie?
Mm-hmm.
So where do you want to start with kind of analyzing this movie and diving a bit more into the weirdness of it and what it all means?
Well, I think you've really already started, just in sort of talking about how this is not a movie that you see a ton of. I should say this type of movie is not something you see all the time. And we touched on commercial viability there and how success can be defined by a box office return and how most movies actually fail by this metric. This movie didn't make a ton of money. And, much like Kruger Industrial Smoothing, I think it was probably in the red or the black or whichever the bad one is.
Kruger.
Yeah, the R's falling off. So, yeah, this... I actually have trouble imagining that this movie was ever meant to make money, even though that seems like an odd proposition. But it does almost seem sort of like, as you said, a measuring stick for Villeneuve. Here's an opportunity. Show us what you can do, kid, and then we'll talk. And yeah, if this movie doesn't make money, fine. This is more of a prestige thing. And, it has to be... I applaud whoever was involved in getting this off the ground, because in the cinema ecosystem of today or 2014, you can't imagine this making a lot of money. And to do that, to make this movie despite that, I think is noteworthy and something that doesn't happen enough, I think.
This is a sad kind of part that these movies, I want to say they're hard to get made these days.
Mm-hmm.
There's a handful of them, but in I want to say the 80s and 90s, I mean, even back to the 70s, the 60s and 70s, with sort of the American films back then, the independent films and the smaller budget films, like there was a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a different world we're living in now. And you could get to the argument about streaming and stuff, but I don't know if I fully buy that completely. Like I feel like the film industry has just shifted from a lot of artistic works like this and artistic pieces to just like, how can we make the most money?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we just keep seeing these recycling of older films, of like remakes and sequels. And it's like, I see this thing of like, here's everything that's coming out in the next year. And it's just like, everything is already an IP.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything is like a prior movie. Everything is a sequel. And it's just, and so, but studios are hesitant to give money to filmmakers to make movies like this, because like you said, it's the what they were banking on these days, like for so long, obviously the box office numbers, and then conversely home video is sort of gone, right? It's like,
mm-hmm.
But box office is still there. It's just, people, it's like been marketed towards, okay, these are like, you have to see this on the big screen. So you have to see, Dune 2 on the big screen, which makes sense. But like,
I agree.
Like you have to see like these You do. But then you have to see like these versus like seeing something like this on the big screen where you're like, oh, I'll see it on streaming, or oh, I'll just see it when it comes out. So, you know, that makes for films like this, it makes it harder for them to exist nowadays, right?
Yeah, and I think part of that, you know, there's a lot of things that contribute to it for sure. Ticket prices, I think, is one aspect of it. You know, to go to the movies now is not the sort of trifling expense that it once was, particularly if you're going with a family. Not that this is a family movie or anything like that, but if you were to go, like, you know, you, your partner, 2 kids, I mean, that's a more expensive day out than it used to be, for sure. And also now too, do you remember? This is probably a small contributor, but it's something to think of. I heard this said by a film critic who I deeply respect, Amy Nicholson. She said that time was, you know, you would go to the movie to see something, and if that was sold out, you saw something else. Yes. And that's when you saw the weird stuff that you never heard of, these little things, you know, that maybe didn't have buzz going into it, and that's how they could pick up momentum. It doesn't really happen anymore because you pre-purchase everything in advance. And like you say, you're only going to the cinemas for something that is based around spectacle in a lot of cases. You want to see the Marvel movie. You want to see the Star Wars movie. You want to see Dune 2, and justifiably so, but it does leave very little in terms of box office for pictures like this. And, you know, you mentioned that we want IP, we want things that are bankable, we want things we've seen before, rehashed and rebooted. And these are things that we want. And this movie seems to actually, in a lot of ways, actively avoid things that audiences want and demand. It doesn't try to explain itself, which is something that people want. We want to know why, we want to know how, but we have no idea why there's a duplicate in this movie. We don't know if it's a clone. We don't know if it's an alternate reality, if it's the same guy with split personalities. Yes. There's moments where this last one seems very, very possible. For a while, I was convinced this was a Fight Club scenario. But even though there's a lot of evidence that points to that, the movie fights back against the conclusions that it invites you to draw. Did you or do you think this was a sort of a Tyler Durden gambit that we saw here?
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, I watched the film, and you know, I love that it challenges us as an audience, right? With how we're interpreting the movie, what we're seeing. I love how the film sticks with us, right? And, you know, I saw this movie, I don't know how many years ago, but, you know, I'll revisit it every few years because it's like, I love that. It's like, you can't get certain images out of your head, right? They're just like, you know, I saw an interesting Denis Villeneuve quote when he was talking about, obviously, like the spider, which everybody sort of talks about this at the last, you know, the spiders are sort of throughout the film, but then like that lasting image. Yeah. And, you know, he talks about it's that doesn't exist in the novel, or, you know, this is loosely based on this book. And, you know, in the book, The Double, there's not these spider imagery, and he sort of makes the reference that it's like, you know, in books you have chapters, you have like these long, like tons of pages to sort of get sort of feelings and ideas across. Whereas in movies and film, you just have like, a lot of times you just have one moment, like you have one scene, you have one image that you can show that you have to get this certain feeling across. And that's one of the reasons he says he used, you know, that lasting image of the spider, because of what it conveyed. And, you know, I think getting back to your question about like, you know, was this sort of a Fight Club? Was it the same guy? It's like, I think that's sort of where I lean to. But I just love that you get something different every time you watch it. Every time we watch it, I'm like, okay, they're different guys. And this is a kind of weird surrealist universe where like, like then you watch again, and you're like, oh, they're twin brothers, but it's like, no, it's not twin brothers. But like, I love how their stories sort of intersect, you know, and they intertwined. And then that plays with our perception as the audience. Like, I'm thinking back to when I watched a film the other day, and I'm thinking back and I'm like, okay, the scene where Adam is talking to his mother, and, you know, that she she comes out and she says something about the blueberries. It's like, oh, he's like, I don't like blueberries. And it's like, wait, okay. So wait, who doesn't like blueberries? And you're like, Anthony said he liked blueberries. And you're sort of playing it in your head. And then at the end of the scene where she says, and you have that nice apartment or whatever, and you're like thinking, Adam's apartment is like grimy and like dark and dingy. And then she's like, and you give up that like ridiculous thing about being an actor.
Yes.
And that's the end of the film. That's the end of the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And you're sort of like left with this idea of, thinking back for me, I'm like, okay, wait, I was thinking in my head when I was thinking about like writing notes or whatever, I was like, wait, that was Adam in that scene. I'm like, yes, that had to be Adam. Mm-hmm. That was Adam. Because he was the one that found out. But I was like, but then wait, what was she, so you're playing with the head in your head. So you're kind of like, versus like something like a Fight Club where you're like, when the end gets revealed, it's like, oh, then you're just like, okay, Tyler Durden's the figment of his imagination, or they're the same guy, or however you want to play it. You're like, oh, that makes sense. Whereas this, it's sort of, you're still, wait, what was it? Mm-hmm. And that, again, kind of going back to what we were talking about with Blade Runner, with the idea of, is Deckard a replicant? And you're like, well, the answer really is in yourself, and it's maybe he is. And you can make cases either way, right? And that's what I think is one of the great lasting points about this film.
Yeah, you're 100% right. This movie reveals itself very slowly and ultimately not at all. We are denied explanation. And I think I like that. I think this is meant to be undecipherable and truly surreal in the purest sense of that word. And something, as we said, we probably don't get enough of. We as an audience, we want to be wowed by how a story can tie everything up neatly and symmetrically.
Yes.
And a lot of times that can lead to disappointment. Now, when it's done with a flourish, when it's done well, it can be awesome. But there ought to be room for enigma in our movies. And that is what we get here. We don't get satisfaction necessarily. We get wondering. We get a contemplative ending that, I mean, the image, like you say, the image of the final shot with the spider, where you thought, he comes into the room, you think it was going to be Helen, and it's the giant spider sort of cowering, and then his response to it is super weird too. It's not shock, it's more resignation. So you're just left thinking, and I like that. I really, really like that.
There's an interesting Denis Villeneuve made the cast sign, I don't know if it was an NDA or just like, I don't know if he actually had them sign or he just told them, but was like, you can't talk about the spiders in the press for it. Like, just don't. Like, and I think part of that was like, you don't want to reveal that sort of like crazy moments and what they mean, but or that they're even in there. But also it's like, it's the idea of like, we as an audience want to say, okay, so like, what does it mean? Like, or like, what is the spider? Like, what are they? There's all these spiders. There's a spider in the sky shot, or the walking through Toronto. There's this one at the beginning in like the sex club. Like, what do the spiders mean? And it's like, like, that's for you to figure out, and it's like, you can kind of decipher whatever you feel it is. And we can talk more about it.
I intend
what we think. What we think it is.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, they're just really like, I mean, they're obviously this like metaphor and I think it's more about him being, it's like he is the Tyler Durden situation. Like for me, when I watch it, I'm like, okay, it's the same guy, right? And he's just how he's interpreting certain things and how he, it's how we are often and how he is perceived. We're going through the world through his perception, and it's like sometimes you can feel disassociated with yourself and you're like, I'm going through the motions, or and that's where I think the spider comes through at the end, where it's like, he's put the affair aside. He's, you know, he's literally killed that side of his life.
Mm-hmm.
He's ending it. He's going to be there for his wife. I don't want to go back to that. I want to be here for you. I want to be the husband you want, the father you want, you know. But then he sees the key, and then he's like, oh, right. Well, and he can't shut it off. So then that's where the spider comes out again. It's just like, and the cowering spider too, right? Like, not the I'm going to kill you spider. It's like this cowering thing.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't turn that off. I'm going to go out tonight. You know, he says that line,
mm-hmm.
and that's when it happens. And he goes in to see her, and he sees just this cowering spider, which again, if you go back to the very first scene, it's a sex worker almost standing, squishing a spider, right? So this, I think I read in another Denis Villeneuve, you know, idea or quote from him talking about the representation of the spider as a idea of femininity. And he thought it was like a feminine, like, you know, people associate spiders with sort of like a scary thing or whatever. But in his mind, he thought of it as a representation of femininity. And like, which was very interesting, I thought, with kind of like how it's depicted throughout.
That is interesting. And you mentioned when we see the final image of the spider, it happens right after he receives the key, which is clearly very similar to the one that we see in the opening scene. The opening of the movie, he's going to this sex club. He has to unlock this door. He has the key. And so now we see this renewal of the cycle. And that's really important because early on we see Adam teaching. He's talking about dictatorships to his class, their need for control, the different methods they employ to achieve it. Talks about the Romans and their bread and circus philosophy. And shout out to our boy David Newman on that one. He will understand why. You distract people with food and you cater to their bloodlust and they'll forget about authoritarian rule. And he talks about how it's not an anomaly, but a pattern that persists throughout history. We as a people and we as individuals, we make the same mistakes over and over again. And I thought about that as I was watching this, and it coalesced at the end, the scene that you mentioned. We see the pattern renew itself on multiple levels. Anthony dies, either literally because they are two different people, or figuratively because he has chosen this thing. You know, it's difficult to say because you do get the radio report of the car crash. So again, the movie kind of pulls the rug on you when you think you know what's happening. But so Anthony dies. Adam, though, is going to take his place. He's sliding into this life. He's got the key and he's going back to the sex show. And you think he's probably going to become now the selfish, unappreciative husband that Anthony was. And Helen is now doing the same thing. She's repeating her mistake because she's going to go with this new guy who is identical to this old guy. And yet somehow thinking it's going to be different. And this is what we do in our lives, in our political cycles, and just the general insane way that our civilization works. It's repetition. It's the same mistake over and over again.
Yeah, I didn't even think about it from Helen's point of view. You know, like her making this, you know, I want you to stay, but it's really the same guy.
Same guy.
I mean, yeah. You know, you mentioned history, and there's like all this, you know, even the names, you know, you mentioned the Romans, the bread and circus philosophy, and her name is Helen of Troy. But like, there's these, the idea Adam, like Adam is the first man. And, you know, the scar, you know, it's on his, you know, his ribs. Right. And then it's like, take the, you know, what is the biblical,
Christ is stabbed with a spear when he's on the cross there.
Oh, well, that there's
in
that too.
That very region,
but then Adam is
the rib taken to make Eve,
and then, you know, in this case, the rib is taken to create, you know, the alternative version of himself.
Oh, that's cool. I hadn't considered that. I like that.
You know, and because they are sort of these polar opposites, right? Obviously. And, I like the Helen idea is really interesting to me, you know, and you talk about the rug being pulled back and like, you know, cause the radio talks about the car crash. So it's like So then it actually happened. Or is it just like in their head, they're thinking, oh, on the radio, this is, you know, this mundane thing. But then also the ring that, you know, that's sort of another indication that they are two different people.
That's right.
You know,
that's
because
right.
it's because if the ring, she had never noticed the ring before, like she would have noticed the ring before, right? Especially in that situation, like you're having sex and you're like, you know, I sort of think in my head, it's like, okay, like how would she, it's like dark and now she notices that he's had like a sort of like a tan line or, you know, whatever, or like, so yeah, so that's what I think is interesting about the film, because like it's not leaning towards, okay, they're one person or they're two different people or they're twins or whatever. They're sort of, he's playing with all these different ideas. And that's what I mentioned, like the scene with the mom. There's a scene later when, I can't remember where it's again, this idea that you think you're watching Adam or you're watching Anthony, and Anthony is in the scene, but then something happens that it's like, it references like his history or like his teacher, or it's like, you're a teacher, but he's just like, wait, what? You know what I mean? There's this, Villeneuve is doing a really great job of really playing with this idea of it could be all these things or could be none of these things. It could be, you know, here's evidence for why it's A, and this is, but then like he contradicts himself in the next scene.
Yeah.
But it's very deliberate, right? This isn't like I frigged up and I, you know, like everything is very calculated.
No, you're absolutely. This was not a frig up, as you so so eloquently put. No, you're 100% right, and it's cool that maybe it's not supposed to make sense. Like this is true surrealism, and that the evidence can point to one thing, and that can be kind of meaningless. And but again, you're right. It's not haphazard. It's not done without intent. I just want to come back to the image of the spider again, because it is kind of baffling, especially when the first time I watched it. And
did you have any sort of sense of, because I didn't tell you anything going in, you sort of watched this?
Nothing. I had nothing. Absolutely nothing. So like the moments when it got weird, I was just like, oh, okay, this is weird. like some of the images, particularly when you see there's that shared vision or dream that both Anthony and Adam have of the nude woman with the spider's head. And there's often this sound effect that kind of permeates the film of like the clickety click click, like it's very reminiscent of a spider moving, and there's just this there's great ever present tension. Though I will say there were points when I thought it was going to get weirder, and I kind of wish it did almost, but again it pulls you back. It doesn't give you quite what you want, and it was almost like there was some meat left on the bone, but so just getting back to the spider though, it does continue. It serves as a follow through for discussions on the mechanisms of control and dictatorship. And the first time we see it, it's one of the more bizarre openings to a film ever. The voyeuristic sex show that ends with a woman crushing a tarantula in high heels. And we see the spider image again in the, like I said, with the nude woman with the spider's head. And then finally, again, with the giant spider towering over the cityscape of Toronto. And so you got the sex show, you got the killing. And this is sort of like a conflation of the two ideas in the bread and circus vein. Sex and violence are extremely effective distractions to a population. If you appeal to hedonistic fantasy, you can sort of do whatever the hell else you want otherwise while people are distracted. But the spider is also this insidious type of predator. It hides, it waits, it traps, and it doesn't kill you right away. You're caught in a web before you die, and you never see the trap coming. And the way the spider looms over the city kind of spoke to this, like it's the enormity of this issue that we can't see. We're caught in a web, in mechanisms of control, and we don't even realize it. Ironically, this includes the Adam character who teaches this exact thing to the class. He doesn't even recognize that, and I thought that was a nice little touch.
Yeah, what's the quote at the beginning of the film? Chaos
is order yet to be understood, or currently misunderstood, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it sets us up perfectly for the film. And aside from there's also just like interesting imagery and like even the color palette. You know, this color palette is this like sort of like washed out sepia, like yellowy,
Yeah.
greenish, like tone that gives this uneasy feeling.
Very.
And it's all washed. It's all sort of like the same palette, the same dullness. And, you know, there's, you know, even the car crash at the end, you know, he lingers on that shot. It's like a violent crash and it just holds the shot and then it zooms in. And what does it zoom in on? The fucking window. And the window looks like what?
A spider web.
Like a spider
Yeah,
web, right?
exactly.
And it's like these, it's you know, he sort of hits us over the head with it a lot. But again, it's not like, it's not hitting you over the head and saying, hey, feel this way, or, you know, take it in this way. It's hitting us over the head with just the imagery that then leads us to thinking, okay, then so, well, how am I interpreting that?
Yes.
Or what does this mean for me? Yeah. And it's like, you sort of, I love how the film ends and begins sort of, like you said, with the sex club and the imagery of the spider. And it's that, again, that continuous loop. It's like at the beginning, are we seeing, is that actually the end of the film? Like, is that Adam going to the sex club and experiencing it for the first time?
I wondered that, yeah.
And like enjoying that. And it's like, is that sort of like, and then it sort of like jumps back in time? Or is that Anthony going from, you know, when he meets the concierge or the receptionist at his building and he's like, I gotta go back.
Yeah. Gotta see that lady crush another spider. Oh man, that was hot. Yeah, no, I wondered that if it was actually, if we were seeing a renewal of, you know, someone making the same mistake again, or were they literally, was this like a Groundhog Day thing? Were we going back in time to relive the events once again? And he does make that quote,
because that's like, because you could argue that scene, like after he walks in and his wife is turned into a giant spider and he sort of like cowers back. He kind of has this like almost like a grin on his face, but like he's not like scared or anything.
He's not.
You could say the next scene, if the film was to continue, is the sex club scene. And then film's starting again.
Yep.
And it's starting again. And it's like this never ending loop.
Yeah.
This never ending.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Absolutely. No, it totally is. And yeah, like, I mean, you have that scene with the concierge too. So again, like maybe he calls him up, maybe they go again. You know, I love the uncertainty of it. It's so great. And, you know, a big part of what makes it all work are the performances in here. There's like, this is a minimalistic movie. There's not a lot propping it up other than direction and acting. And I mean, obviously a script, but it's, everyone does such an extraordinary job of conveying nuance in their relationships. I love the way Mary, Melanie Laurent, who's just incredible. Like I love her in Inglourious Bastards. I love her in everything. She's great. And she's able to really effectively capture this sense of dissatisfaction with Adam, but also this kind of resignation that she can't or doesn't want to do anything about it. She's kind of in the same thing. Like she's sort of making the same mistakes as well. Like she's all, there's a repetition there with her. And you know, all of that is done with very subtle looks and facial expressions, and she's brilliant. You know, it has to be said again.
Yeah, she's great, and I mean, this is like sort of like a strong indication of that independent film, right? It's like, how can I create a film that is impactful? Oh.
Balloons are back
again. Balloons are back. I had balloons come across my screen.
No, these are my everyday balloons. It's not going to stay inflated until New Year's. No. These are my everyday.
My everyday balloons. But this is an indication of sort of like an independent film because, you know, you have minimal actor. It's like how can we do this on a shoestring budget. You know, you mentioned earlier, it was like, we don't know what the budget was.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like not known in this film. And, you know, the majority of it probably went to Gyllenhaal, and, you know, it was probably, you know, he got a large chunk of it. And then, like, you know, there's, you know, other named actors, but they're not getting as great as Laurent is. And like, she's not getting a ton of money for this.
She's not getting Gyllenhaal money, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. You know, but it's like, how can we make the most of, you know, so it's like, that's why a lot of these scenes, it's like, it's just two actors, or it's just, you know, it's, you know, small settings. And, you know, if you're thinking about there's very few like scenes in the film that you were like, okay, this is like a grandiose. There is, but like, you think about the car crash scene, it's like there's only one car crash, and it's not like they're, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But that's what's so, you know, that's what I feel like you said, maybe if there was no, I don't want to say critique, because I think the film does a good job of like you said, using, getting across its ideas with minimal budget, or minimal settings and minimal actors. And, you know, like what does this film look like with a $50 million budget?
Yeah.
I know it doesn't get made, but it's just an interesting kind of, like you sort of mentioned earlier, felt like something was like, there was some meat left on the bone. Like, what does Denis Villeneuve do if he has, like, he can create other scenes or other scenarios that, or does that movie even exist, or can it exist? You know, like, so it's like, I don't know. Those are all hypothetical questions, but
but worthwhile questions to ask for sure. And yeah, I think this is the kind of story that almost benefits from being deprived in a little way financially.
Yeah.
This movie, I think, is most effectively made in the way it was made. I don't know if we get anything better by adding money to it. I like the minimalism of it. I like that it's really, you see what can be done with just great acting, great directing. Cinematography is good. And some of the establishing shots are really, really pretty.
That's
really well done. I like the runtime that it's edited. Wow, double dose of balloons. You know, and I'm usually not a big Gyllenhaal guy, or at least lately, a lot of the things I've seen him in, I found him to be powerfully unlikable. Not that his performances weren't good, but that the characters never came across as anything other than loathsome, and not loathsome as an effective villain might be. Like, I think they were meant to be guys you were supposed to like, but it just did not work, and had the complete opposite effect on me. We talked about this. I saw The Guilty, and I remember reaching out to you about it. I don't know if you remember this, but it's this movie where he's a cop who's been demoted, and so he's working the 911 like call center. And I remember we were talking about, we're just like, are we supposed to like this guy? Like, it was.
What about the ambulance? Wasn't he in the ambulance?
He was, but I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that. That's a different movie.
Is this the movie? Is Guilty? Yeah, Guilty's the
he gets a call,
like,
and the wife has been kidnapped, or at least ostensibly that's what's happened. And you know, he's got this whole backstory where he's trying to get his daughter back after a divorce, and he's meant to be sympathetic. You can tell, because they've used sort of tropes to make him a character you want to root for, and he is not. I just hated him. And it's the same thing in The Covenant, that the Guy Ritchie movie, where he's a soldier from he was in the Afghanistan war, and again, I think he's meant to be someone you root for, and I just friggin' hated him. Anyway,
that's The Covenant.
That's The Covenant.
What about Jarhead?
No, Jarhead's different. Jarhead's way older. He's in Iraq, but it's been a long time since I've seen that.
Interesting.
But all that to say, this was a different experience, because I don't think we're necessarily supposed to like either of these guys, and it kind of doesn't matter in a movie like this,
right?
Because. Yeah, again, the movie is so weird. I don't think typical sort of conventions of having to root for a lead really apply here. And in any case, I think Gyllenhaal is undeniably great. That scene where he's rehearsing the "Did you fuck my wife" speech that he ends up giving to Anthony gives to Adam, so good.
Oh, I love it.
So
yeah.
Good.
He's an interesting actor, man. Like, he's made some interesting choices. Yeah, Ambulance and The Guilty, which are essentially like the same movie. Or The Ambulance, he's in the ambulance, and Guilty, he's the receiving. Yeah, but he's interesting because he's made some like, he's made a lot of like. Oh, he's made a film called The Velvet Buzzsaw, Velvet Fog.
Ooh. Combined with the Japanese buzzsaw.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Tajiri.
Oh, buddy.
But Everest, Southpaw, like some like weird ones. But then he like Nightcrawler was an amazing movie. But Prisoners is really an interesting companion piece to this, obviously because of Denis Villeneuve. But like his performance in that, like that's almost perfect. Like grizzly cop sort of. He portrays that just so well. But yeah, he and then you can go to the Brokeback Mountain, all that sort of stuff. But he's made interesting choices in his career, but he's a powerful actor when I feel like the right situation arises. And I think something like this and Prisoners, he sort of goes down that road. Yeah. Like I'm always captivated in scenes where an actor has to play two different characters in the same scene. I can't really think of anything off the top of my head, but I know I've seen it.
Well, Jean-Claude Van Damme in Double Impact is sort of the benchmark. I think that's kind of the...
You're not wrong.
Yeah.
You're not wrong. But he's like, I love that moment where he comes in the hotel room and he's sort of, it's that slow panning shot and he's just like, what the fuck, as Adam. And then Anthony opens the door, he walks in, we follow him in, and you're following him and the camera pans and it gets to the side shot. It's like, I'm always captivated by how those little camera tricks. And then he turns and it's like he's facing, it's like, oh, but it was one shot. Like, how did they do that? You know what I mean? I always am so captivated by those sort of moments. And there's then he's back on and the camera's then from behind. But I was like, how'd they get from showing his face to turning around to showing him looking at, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But he's quite strong in this film.
I agree.
For sure.
I agree.
Yeah. But yeah, okay, we thought we wouldn't talk too long for this. Another thing, the last thing I'll mention before we sort of get into whether we think this is a hell of a picture. I think we both enjoyed it, but whether it gets that distinction. I find this interesting watching this. We had watched Following, right? We did a few Chris Nolan films, and this has lots of similarities to sort of Following and another early work by Nolan, Memento, sort of this idea. Yeah, I just found it interesting that we chose to do this film, having done Following and those sort of similarities with very huge directors, like what they're doing now, the scope of the films they're making now to both their early work, like this Enemy and Following for Chris Nolan.
Mm-hmm.
And you could even say it's Memento, but yeah, it's very interesting. What great artists and great directors can do sort of on a smaller scale. And then what they're doing now with such a huge, big budget movies, which are obviously are huge culturally and, box office wise.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting juxtaposition of, as you say, an artist in different circumstances. What can you do, in a minimalistic kind of way, and what can you do on the grandest of scales if we give you $250 million to do whatever the hell you want? So
exactly.
It is a real testament to both those guys, both Nolan and Villeneuve, as artists, as directors, to be able to perform so well in both scenarios. And yeah, two filmmakers I look forward to continuing to watch in the years to come and see what they can do. And it's going to be exciting. I think I might be more excited about Villeneuve, interestingly enough. I really like
too.
what he's done.
Absolutely.
Even when he's doing that big stuff, he seems to find a way to defy convention a little bit. I think he's a little more adventurous. I think we can expect a little more deviation from the norm with him, and that interests me very much.
So we both decided last week his 2049. Surprisingly, I think both made it as a hell of it. We both decided it was a hell of a picture. So I have to ask you, Enemy 2014, Denis Villeneuve film. Is it for you? Will you turn your key, launch us, and will you make this a hell of a picture? Is it a hell of a picture for you?
I like a lot of things about this movie.
Yes.
First of all, I love that it was even made. We talked because it was unlikely to ever make money. I like that people took a chance on this just to make something for the sake of making an interesting piece of art, knowing that the return was not necessarily going to be there. I like that it's a very contained story. It's small in scale, but big in idea.
Yes.
And it never even deigns to explain itself. I love that. Love that.
Yeah.
The moment you try to give reason to any of this is the moment the film loses its way. And this is meant to be enigmatic and maybe even contradictory, like we talked about. And I wish that industry allowed for more stuff like this to get made. But is it a hell of a picture? I don't think so. Not for me. But not everything has to be. You know,
that's right.
You know what I mean? And this could maybe, if you did things to this to try to make it that, I think it loses its way. So no, but boy, I'm glad we watched it.
So I always love when you ask the question and then answer it. Am I upset that Beth left me? Of course I am. Am I hoping to pick up the pieces and move? Sure.
Absolutely.
Do I think this is a hell of a picture? No. But does everything have to be? No.
That's right. I am very David. Is Lookner? Is it Lookner? Yeah, David, yeah, that's right.
David and Beth. I've been holding out that marriage for years.
I gotta get on that.
I agree, man. I love this movie, and I've revisited it a bunch now, and it stays with me. It's really sort of almost for me. It's probably like I'm turning over the key to make it a hell of a picture. It doesn't quite get there because I feel like, I don't want to say it's missing something because I think I raised the question earlier, like what would this movie look like if it had a bigger budget, or if it could have done more. But it's like I don't know if it necessarily needed to. I just feel like putting it up against other movies that we've deemed held a picture. It's like I don't necessarily love it as much as those movies.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean I don't think it's a great movie though, a great film and a great artistic achievement. And I think it's, if anybody that have gotten this far in the podcast and hasn't seen the movie, it's like you should obviously watch it. But I feel like the majority of people listening to this have watched that film, and it's definitely a film worth watching and even rewatching. So it's like I don't think it's a case of like, oh, this is not a movie I would ever rewatch. It's like I think it warrants rewatching to try to get something else and something different out of it, which I think is a strong component of, for us, what makes a hell of a picture. So it's just something that's like, not quite there, I think, from a standpoint. But again, I think it's a great movie, and it's I love it and enjoy it, and maybe my opinion will change in the coming years if I continue to rewatch it.
Will my opinion change if I rewatch the film? Maybe.
Maybe. But do I still like the film? Sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're in Denis Villeneuve world. We've mentioned Prisoners a bunch today, but that's not where we're going next week. We're sort of out of this, like we said, the reality dream, surrealist films. And now we're into Denis Villeneuve. We did Blade Runner last week. We did Enemy this week. And we have a special something coming up. David, you want to let everybody know what's happening the next week or the next couple of weeks, I guess?
Yeah, well, once again, I will be returning home for a visit. Yep, couldn't be happier. and so that means we're gonna be recording in person, and we're gonna do something pretty exciting for that. We did minimalist Villeneuve, and now we are going to do the grandest of stages Villeneuve. So we're going to do Dune. We are going to do not just Dune 1, not just Dune 2. We are going to do the Dune saga as it currently exists in 2 parts, and we are going to talk about them as one film in 2 parts. And man, am I stoked to do that. I've seen these movies a couple times already, and I could go for another. I could do it again, and we've yet to talk about it in depth, and very excited for that.
Yeah, the idea being that we'll do 2 of these, as David said. Well, they'll be released as 2 different episodes. I don't know if we're gonna decide if we're gonna kind of. We'll probably do them both as 2 set. Like, maybe we'll do our distinction on if it's a hell of a picture at the end of the second episode, and we'll sort of say at the beginning of the, at the end of the first episode, we'll talk about the first film. We'll talk about them kind of collectively at the beginning, and then we'll specifically talk about the first film in the first episode next week. And then the following episode, we'll talk about obviously part 2, and then we'll sort of say whether we think they're both hell of a pictures or combined they're a hell of a picture. I don't know. We'll sort of figure that out as we go.
Yeah.
Because the interesting thing about this film is, there's competing ideas as to how people feel about the first one versus the second one, versus about them collectively, whether there's kind of like the third one or the going, continuing down this line. There's lots to discuss about Dune and Dune 2. And I'm so excited for this, man. Mm-hmm. And we got to do it in person again. One of our, we sort of had the most fun, I think, when we did The Rock in person, and we can sort of actually be in the same room and talk about these movies. So it's going to be fun.
Absolutely.
Can't wait.
Absolutely.
Amazing. All right. So for David Hollingshurst, my name is Andrew Bartlett, and we will see you all next week and the week after for Dune and Dune Part 2. See you then.